Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Torres Dwyer, accompanied by Efrain Rosario. Hey, Efrain.
Hey, Daniel. How are you? Good to be here.
Very good, very good. Efrain, have you been through any M&As, mergers and acquisitions in your career?
Not directly. I've been with companies that either went through a merger acquisition before I joined or after I had moved on to my next role. But I know that, that those can be quite complex times. And they bring in all sorts of new things to consider.
Exactly. It's the particularly interesting moment of a business. It's pretty stressful, I would say. And our guest today is pretty thick-skinned because he's been through mergers, acquisitions, being acquired, and also spin-offs. So you can imagine how that's shaped his leadership style. His name is Antonio Iandolo. He's currently the CEO of one of the major players in the underwear category, the French-based Eminence Group. And this is a sector which you'll see may come off a bit the radar because it's kind of fast-moving apparel, not to be mistaken with fast retail, but it's apparel such as, for example, underwear that has an omni-channel proposition, but as a more commoditized item is traded more similarly to a fast-moving consumer brand with all the advantages and attractiveness that has as an employer. So with Antonio, we'll go over this category as well as, of course, go a bit into his unique experience in the industry and how that's shaped his leadership style.
I'm Antonio Iandolo. I am CEO of Delta Textile France, which is the French subsidiary of Delta Galil Group. Delta is one of the major players in textile in the world with approximately $3 billion net sales. It is active in all the field of underwear, men, women, and also outwear. We own brands like Eminence, Athena, Seven for Mankind, Schisser in Germany. Delta Textile, it is basically looking after the south of Europe. Delta Textile France. We own and control the brand Eminence and Athena in France. We have the brand Liabel and the subsidiary in Italy, and we operate also in Spain, Portugal, and other export markets. I have joined the company Delta since July last year, and I'm very excited of the start that I could have.
Hey, well, Antonio, it's a pleasure to have you on the show finally, because I know that we've gone back and forth with having you here. I was very interested in what you're doing at Delta now, but I know that previously, probably like around last year, I'd already mentioned that I would love to have you on the show because one thing that's always called my attention of your experience is the fact that wanting it or not, you've been through an amazing number of M&As in your career, that you've just basically been in a company that's been acquired or been in a company that's acquired or whatnot. Can you quickly tell us a bit about that background that you have of like companies being acquired?
Yes. Well, I have a profile of marketeer. I started in P&G, but then moved to Sara Lee. Sara Lee divested the business of textile, and I was in it. Then when Sara Lee divested it, we went independent, and I was part of the team that then sold back the group, which at the moment was called DBA, Dean Brands Apparel, to Hanes. I stayed for Hanes, and then I participated to the divestiture of the Hanes Group, by the Hanes Group of Dean company. Well, going through merger acquisition, it is a lot of work, but it is also a lot of learning and fun, in the sense that you try to understand and you get into the details of different ownership and different philosophy. You have the philosophy of the big multinational like Sara Lee. You have the philosophy of the investment private equity fund like Sun Capital, who owned DBA, which is a completely different approach. It is more about cash and more about long-term development and for sure profitability improvement. Then I've been in another big multinational like Eminence and I became independent. And becoming independent is anyway a big challenge because, well, when you're living in a big multinational, many things that you think are granted, like, I don't know, cash pooling, servers, IT, etc., become not granted in a moment you spin off. So it is a lot of work to render a company independent. I can say there's even a more work to render a company independent than being acquired. That's the story. And I've been covering different role in commercial, marketing, general management, and I've been seeing the different aspect of it. And it has always been very interesting. And by the way, very rewarding for my career because in each development I could grow, which is a very good opportunity. So I'm not afraid of change, but I think the change is really always bringing something important and something new and maybe even advantageous.
Yeah, I mean...
Go ahead, Daniel, please.
Yeah, that was something that when people think of like their career, their future career, that's not something that people necessarily count on, no? Going through all these, acquisitions, divestments, spin-offs, etc.
It is a part of life now.
Yeah.
It's not, a company that, the company are hybrid and transform themselves. What is important is to have a healthy business that is appealing, no matter in which corporate context you are. I mean, an example, it is the DIM business in France, no matter in which context it was. Within Sara Lee, within DBA, within Eminence, remained a very interesting business, very strong in terms of market share and very profitable. And that, let's say, remains no matter what is the corporate situation. So it's important to navigate through the uncertainty of building on a strong business. That's the key point. And when you are a manager, you have to focus on the business and not only on managing the administrative part of the divestiture or reinvesture, etc. It's really focus on the business.
So Antonio, somebody who's been through, as you just described, all these different transformations at the various companies that you've been with. I'm curious to understand what drew you to your current company, to Delta Galil, and to managing the Eminence brand.
Well, Delta Galil has got highly important ambitions to become stronger in Europe. They are very strong already in the United States, in Israel, etc. And they are very acquisitive. So for sure, apart from my capability of managing, let's say, intimate men underwear business, there is also interest in the fact that I know and I am familiar and I am not scared by integrating companies or being integrated.
Yeah, I imagine, like you said, that all your M&A experience will come in very handy as you guys look to grow the business.
It is a major attitudinal point that I think my current employed found into my profile. And I think it's very important to have this hybrid, flexible profile because it can always be handy, as you said.
Yeah. So I'm curious to understand, like you said, it's a combination of both, like in essence, like functional knowledge and expertise of having been through mergers and acquisitions, but it's also the functional part of it, or sorry, the attitudinal part of it. I'm curious, what's your perspective in regards to what are some of the attitudes that you have to have in mind as you go through these kinds of experiences?
There are 3 points in my view. First of all, you have to keep focus on the business, because if you you just look just at the administrative part, you defocus the business, and it's important to somehow to transfer one business from one company to another, keeping focus on making what we are good at. Point number 2, there is a fundamental important point linked to cash. Business work if you have cash, so it's very important that you guarantee cash throughout the transition. And point number 3, it's a question of attitude. You have to embrace change positively and, let's say, live your day in an open way, not trying to stick to the past, but more likely molding into the future.
What about one spin-off of this part? I think that a lot of problems that come with these processes around ego and losing influence, losing power and so on. Obviously you've been in leadership roles for a long time. How have you managed that situation of having to maybe take compromise and so on, and also comparing with peers and so on?
Well, first of all, if you have a good profile and good capability, no matter who comes in will understand it. So you have to have trust in yourself. Point number 2, it is perfectly normal to pass from, let's say, line to staff position to being in charge of one day of a big business unit, the other day of international function, etc. It's important to accept the variety of roles, and the variety of roles will always come if your profile is right and your attitude is right. I didn't have never experienced the experience, ever had the experience in which you say, okay, you're not good anymore. Because if you are in the business, you can be good, maybe in a different way you think, but you can be, let's say, positive for the business if you have achieved results, you have demonstrated, and you have the right attitude. So again, it's really the trust into the change rather than the fear of the change.
And now that you joined Delta, at that stage of your career, coming from them, which, as you know, as you said, is a very recognized brand, what motivated to join Delta?
First of all, Delta owns in France 2 brands, Eminence and Athena, that combined together, they're very different brands to different target. Combined together, they're leader in the men underwear. Men underwear, its leadership position is dim is smaller. So in that specific category, there is a leadership position. And my, how can I say, trigger was that building on a very strong leadership position in one category, I could work via acquisition, via merging, via, let's say, organic work, etc., to reinforce the presence of the Delta Galil Group also in other category or in other countries. We are reinforcing our presence in men underwear in women underwear in France, in menstrual panties in France, but we are also restructuring and integrating our big business in Italy. By the way, in Italy, we are with the brand Liabel, we are leader of thermal underwear. And in a hot country, which is a paradox, thermal underwear is very important because there is no heating in the house or less heating in the house. So we are basically piggybacking on our strength in order to build presence in new category. And this is very, very exciting.
So, Antonio, I'm curious to also hear about, like you said, both in France, but also in Italy and in other European markets, your perspective in working for an apparel brand that ultimately is very accessible to a large portion of its audience, right? So comparing that to some of the higher end luxury fashion brands that are not really, in essence, accessible to a large majority of the population. I'm just curious to get your perspective in regards to working for a brand that's very available and accessible to the masses.
Well, what it is very good when you are an accessible brand like Hanes, Dim, Athena, name it. I worked also in my past on Pampers. So let's say very accessible brand. The key point is that you can be truly omnichannel. Because if you have a niche brand, by definition, you have to have niche distribution. On the contrary, what is exciting in, how can I say, fast-moving consumer good brands, if I can use this expression, is the big opportunity of being truly omnichannel and addressing the consumer in every place they work, even in, strange places like, I don't know, automatic distributors, on the planes for hosiery or for socks. Many things that the point of contact with consumer are enormous. So you have, a lower margin per unit, but you have the opportunity to do enormous volume and be invisible everywhere. So this is, in my view, exciting.
Yeah, because Antonio, when we talked before, you'd been very straightforward to me that this was not fashion. This was FMCG.
Yes. By the way, Delta has got also a very developed division in fashion, which is managing 7 for Mankind, which is quite important brand, let's say, Total Look. We manage Polo, Ralph Lauren underwear. We manage Adidas underwear, but it's a different. I also have some business unit doing that, but it's a different mindset. This is more a mindset of exclusivity, of differentiation, while the mindset of fast-moving consumer good is truly access.
Yeah. Where does it sit, like, on the axis if we put, like, FMCG, like, as you said, Pampers, for example, who you worked with it in P&G, and then fashion, I don't know, Nike, Adidas, something like that. And then Eminence, for example, one of the brands that you manage. Where would you put them in that axis?
Well, at the end of the day, the key indicator is the price and the related margin that goes with it. Mm-hmm. So when you work on a luxury brand, the key point is having a high margin and the possibility to command a very high price, because you put a lot of features in the product you're selling. On the contrary, the difficult part of the fast-moving consumer goods story is the fact of having costs that allow you to have the right margin. So there is much more focus. On one side, there is the focus from an industrial point of view on the, how can I say, craftsmanship concerning luxury, and on the industrial replication concerning fast-moving consumer good. It's a very different business philosophy.
Yeah. So, and when you work with like the retailers, because I understand that you're distributed in some of like the mass market retailers.
All of them.
Like, well, Carrefour, Auchan.
All of them. Yes.
You name it. Is it very different than when you're working in an FMC, in a home care or personal care categories, in terms of like how the negotiation and trade terms?
When you're talking in a men's underwear or women panties, which is a commodity, is not that difference. Mm-hmm. The negotiation is still on the margin that you can have while keeping a very accessible price and very high rotation. You are evaluated on the same KPI.
And is it also as promotion dependent as these other categories are?
Yes. Let's say between one third and half of the volume in men underwear and women panties, different is bras, or in socks, it is somehow features by some promotion. Take an example. If you look at socks business, basically all socks are in multi-packs. Go to Carrefour, for example, in Barcelona, and you will see that men underwear is always multi-pack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
So it's a highly promotional, as much as sometimes even more than some. I'm sure we promote more than Nutella.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because and I love how you expressed it, Antonio, which is this whole discussion of it's just a different mindset in terms of when you're selling a product that's very much differentiated, or its value proposition is very focused on craftsmanship and features that they're doing, versus something that's where cost becomes very critical, and what can you do to drive cost and maintain that healthy margin. Obviously, that's going to play a role with retailers as well. But at the end of the day, I think the one thing that's consistent across that axis we just described is the wanting to, in essence, manage that what % of your product is being sold on promotion, right? Because obviously, the lower that is, the better it is for you as a brand as well. I did have a question. You mentioned it earlier where you talked about, the fact that you are an accessible brand, or the brands that you you manage are very accessible, and that opens you up to being able to look at things in a much more omni-channel sort of way. Can you tell us a little bit about, what that means for you all in terms of like the different channels that you pursue? Obviously, we talked about retailers and selling through them, but I'm curious to understand your perspective about other points of sale that you guys are exploring with the brands.
Well, we are very strong online. 15% of our volume is online, because at the end of the day, you can offer a low hassle repeated purchase for our category, which is quite liked by the people. We, for example, as men, are not very interested into losing time to buy a boxer, wasting time to buy the boxer. So the moment you have a business proposition that gives you the possibility to buy comfortable thing at a decent price, we're fine. So online is very important. Our discount is very important, especially in this moment of inflation and crisis. In certain category, for example, menstrual panties, etc., pharmacies are very important. And everything which is commodity, like point of contact, like airports, etc., travel business, etc. This is very important as well, because you can always in every moment need this kind of thing. Another dimension which is important, it is sport. Sport, everybody runs, but if you need to run, the product must be extremely comfortable. So you have the possibility, in that case, to express your own, technical capability in a product which is a little bit more technical, a little bit more premium. That's why, for example, the Delta Group is developing in women and men and sports underwear with Adidas.
Interesting. And does that mean that you also sell in some of those retailers as well, like the Decathlons and the Go Sports?
Yes, we have a dedicated sales force for that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then for online, is it mostly through the online arm of the retailers, or do you have your own DTC?
We have our own site, which is fundamental to fixing the price and giving a point of reference. And then we're present in all the pure players, all kinds of players. And we are exploring, exploiting, I would say, rather than exploring, with a lot of pleasure, the marketplace model. We are capable of shipping by the unit from our warehouse. And it is a nice way to optimize and use our warehouse also for this kind of activity.
Mm-hmm. An issue that a lot of FMCG companies have when it comes to direct to consumers, like the economics of that, like low value baskets, with the logistics and so on, it doesn't work for them. Does it work better in your category and somehow?
Yeah, it works well, as long as you take very strong control of your GPM. The key point is gross profit margin, which is the price and the costs. You have to optimize your cost, and that's why, for example, we have a lot of supply chain work on these kind of things, because you have to give a product which is normally a textile product, which is labor intensive, at a very excessive price.
Yeah.
So exactly. Key point you have to watch as a general manager is the gross profit margin.
Mm-hmm. Also, had you mentioned to me that you have some footprint in own physical retail as well?
Yes, we have basically, we're working in a dimension of, we have a company of the group which is working in the, what is called retail discount outlet. We are in discount centers.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Because we sell our brands, but we do not want to, change our DNA of accessibility. We didn't develop, a premium line in order to sell expensive in the center city. We have adapted to the model and using outlet and retailers outlet.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So when you joined the company, you mentioned the reasons why. Now that you're in the company and you're heading it up, what's your approach to attracting top talent to it, being, arguably not as a well-known brand as like the big FMCG players on one side, and then the apparel players on the other side, like you're in some kind of middle ground, and you obviously produce very massively spread products, but maybe they don't have like the brand awareness that other companies have, or other companies that you yourself have worked at?
The key point is the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibility of working in a very agile environment. Big companies are more, how can I say, bureaucratic. That's a big word because, let's say, more complex in the management. In a smaller company, you have the possibility to directly manage projects from A to Z. So have visibility, have satisfaction, and have also the reward that you need to have. By the way, Delta is a quite big company, although not so present in France. So there is also the opportunity for the better talent then to be exploited or to develop further within the group, which is something which is interesting and is a point of strength. Because there is, especially for for young talent or special talent, the willingness sometimes of experimenting themselves, trying themselves also abroad on other businesses. And by the way, we are based in the south of France. The climate is nice, and let's say the food is good, and the weather is fantastic.
I would also add, Antonio, and further to the point that you mentioned before, the fact that it's a category that's really interesting and has very specific dynamics can make it also very interesting for talent. The fact that it's truly omni-channel makes it very unique. Not that it has the speed of FMCG, but it has the spread of other.
For example, we have a very young and dedicated team of experts in e-commerce, and they come from all over France and international, and they moved to south of France because of the quality of life and because of the capability they have and the confidence they have in working remote, which is something that, I mean, they're not based in Paris, but they can work and interface like they're based in Paris or whatever, even they're based worldwide. So I think that for younger generation, the geographical, how can I say, criteria is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I think one other thing to point out, and you referenced it earlier, which is that it's a category that's in essence relevant to, I would say, 99%, or close to 100% of the population.
Yes,
right?
100%. I know very, very few people that go around without their boxers or their underwear.
Exactly.
Especially
we all know somebody, though.
Well, there are certain specific usage and attitudes in women wearing, which sometimes request a different, specific, almost invisible underwear, but not in men.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Antonio, this has been great. And I've learned a lot about a category that, like as a consumer, obviously I'm familiar with. So I'm part of that close to 100%. But not something that I've worked in directly. And we have one final question to ask you. And it's a question that we ask all of our guests, which is to, in essence, ask you to put yourself back in the shoes of when you first started your career. So when you were back at Procter & Gamble, working as a brand manager, if you go back in time and you could go tell Antonio at that point in his career one piece of advice based on everything you've learned over your vast experiences that you walked us through today, what would that piece of advice be?
To let my instinct go. Sometimes, in a couple of cases, I protected, let's say, my company position by sticking to something that was glamorous, maybe, but let's say not anymore right for me, instead of embracing a new challenge. It happened very rarely, but sometimes we really have to, I think I really have to trust my instinct, because usually instinct is very important, it's as important as facts. Also because instinct is a different way the brain has to capture facts.
This was Antonio Iandolo, CEO of the Eminence Group. Hey, Efrain, what are your conclusions? Are you going to have a different attitude when you go in my underwear now?
Well, I certainly will be looking for the Eminence brand next time I'm in a retailer, for sure, now that I know more about Antonio's story. But certainly I have a lot of respect, not that I didn't have any before, but newfound respect for people who have been able to thrive in an M&A situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that whenever I've spoken with Antonio in the past, that's something that I've found super interesting. And initially, that's why I really wanted to bring him into the podcast. But I also really like learning about the underwear category and the dynamic of it and how it's very different to other apparel. And that like fast-moving yet omni-channel value proposition, which doesn't really exist so much in like regular grocery.
Well, I think, given the dynamics of his specific category of underwear, undergarments, it does really open you up from an omni-channel perspective in terms of the number of channels that you can consider from a distribution standpoint. Whereas like if you're something that's a bit more premium, you've got a smaller set of channels for distribution, right? So like he said, because we can be sold almost anywhere in the world, and it's almost a close to universal need for underwear.
Yeah,
we can really be omni-channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting because he said that 15% of their volume is online, because they can offer repeated purchase. So I thought it was really interesting, and I learned. I was expecting to learn a lot, but I learned even more than I was expecting. So that's always good.
Absolutely. And I think for me, one of the big takeaways was just listening to him in terms of the lessons learned through his M&A experience in regards to the things that he kind of takes to heart and shares with his teams as they go through those kinds of experience in terms of continuing to focus on the business, really thinking about cash as being critical and embracing change in a positive sort of way, right? So not to fear it, but to really think about, the opportunities that it can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn about his calm style within the storm, I would say.
Yeah, he's definitely someone you want as captain of your ship in that kind of storm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Efrain. Thanks to our listeners as well for tuning in. Remember, if you haven't yet, to leave us a review at the bottom of your screen. If you have any feedback, feel free to contact us as well. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.